Welcome, I'm Jon Caldara, president of the Independence Institute, and I'm wearing a shirt. It's orange. Deal with it. It's a lifestyle. And I'm also your devil's advocate to talk a little bit later on in the show about Jefferson County and the new tax increase that's going to come up statewide this fall. But first, let's talk a little more education in Douglas County. Damon Sasso is the head of a little group called DougCo Champions for Kids.
That's correct.
All right. So basically, we work together, and you're
sadly we do. Yes.
Sadly we do. You lucky man. DougCo Champ for Kids is basically a grassroots organization to help get out information on the grassroots level of what's going on in DougCo.
Correct. It's also a coalition of the various grassroots organizations that already exist in DougCo. Great Choice Douglas County, Douglas County Parent Alliance, and there's a few others too.
All right. Why is there so much interest in Douglas County? For those people who don't get it, Douglas County is a hotbed of educational reform. A lot of people are excited in different directions about what's going on. What's unique about Douglas County? How big is it?
Douglas County, I don't know the actual population number, but it's a pretty big county. They've got 3,000 schools, and it's one school district for the entire county.
So this is, I heard, the third largest school district in the entire state.
That sounds right, yeah.
All right. And what's happened in the last few years that has gotten everyone's attention?
Well, the last couple of years, I don't know if you've ever heard of anything called school reform, but in the last few years, school reform has taken an absolute hold in that area. A slate of candidates was run in about 2008, and they came in and said, hey, we want to put some reforms in place to get the school, I guess, to right the ship. They were about $20 million in debt. A raise for the teachers had come through, and it was on a bond initiative, but it didn't pass. So
this was a big thing because there was this mill levy increase or tax increase. The voters said no.
No, and it was at 2008, and there was a little something called a recession at that time, and it was
at that time.
Yeah, normally those
not anymore. Fortunately,
yeah, we're totally recovered now. But more importantly, the bond didn't pass. It was the first time it didn't pass, and the district had to make serious cuts. Bus schedules, teachers were being laid off. It was not a pretty time in DougCo.
And they were out of cash. They were out of, people were frustrated, but the voters said no. We've paid you what we're paying you, and you're going to have to deal with it.
Right.
This board took to this and started doing some pretty unique things, up to the point now that people are upset that they have too much money in their budget. What did they do?
Well, you have to understand. The teachers union that was in 2008 was part of the school district is no longer actually they don't any longer have a collective bargaining agreement. What ended up happening is during the renegotiation process, when the district was going through some of these reforms, they instituted a choice scholarship program, market pay for performance. And they also tried to renegotiate with the union because during the tough times, they're like, listen, we want you to be accountable for your time. We want you to do this. They asked for them to meet them, on some of their terms in their contract. And what a lot of people don't know is the union actually refused to negotiate on a lot of those points and simply said, if you don't do this, then we're just going to walk. So they actually walked away.
This is pretty huge stuff. You've got the third largest school district in all of Colorado. They put in a scholarship program for people who wanted to try a different school. That got tangled up in the courts. Recently, the courts have now said, well, no, you're right, and so it's back on.
Yeah, a lot of the groups that were created actually were formed after the collective bargaining agreement was designed, was put away or terminated. But what ended up happening was I think it was Taxpayers for Public Education, a group, and a lot of what I call splinter cell groups have come out of union groups and friends of the union and teachers that were working for the union.
So basically, it was time to renegotiate the contract, and every school district goes through this. Every large school district in Colorado has a contract, and occasionally they come to blows when it's time to renew, and occasionally, very rarely, but there's a strike that happens. In this case, in Douglas County, the contract came to an end. They were still trying to negotiate, and after a while, both sides said, forget it. So we have the third largest school district in the entire state that is now operating without a union contract. Now, if I understand right, it's complete chaos, that children are being sacrificed. Nobody's learning anything. The schools are dangerous. What's life like in DougCo schools without a teacher's contract?
Well, I would have to say that things are still going pretty well. It's not the pandemonium that you're describing. And in fact, Graduation rates are up in the district. They've reduced the technology fee. The district administration has saved $2 million, and quite frankly, I mean,
how did
everything
they
is
save $2
still
million?
very good. They did something called cutbacks. One of the biggest things that the district did that I think was really impressive is they switched to site-based budgeting rather than the kind of spend to zero plan where you.
What does that mean? Site-based budgeting.
Site-based budgeting is much like you would budget for your home. You've got a certain amount of money coming in. You'd like to have some set aside to save. And what they said is, we think principals at the local school level should be able to control their budget, should be able to buy what's needed for the classroom, talk with their teachers about what's needed, and come to a consensus of what the school could use, and they could use that money, and it was allowed to roll over year to year.
Oh, this is huge. This is different in government.
Yeah.
In government, if you don't use your budget money, you lose it. Thus, the constant refrain in government: use it or lose it. And if there's money at the end of the year in your budget, you have better use it, because otherwise they're going to cut you next year. Yeah. You're telling me that not only school principals got a say in their budget and got control over their own school's budget instead of having it handed down, but they could keep what they didn't use?
Yeah, and oftentimes the school accountability committees, they call them SACs for each school, can have some say in where that money goes. I just want to share a personal story, because a lot of people, when people say, oh, we're having budget cuts, especially in government, what they forget is it's not necessarily a cut. I had a friend who worked for Metro State College, and in the relationship that we had, I got to see where, how money was spent. And one of the things that being a small business owner myself, I know how to run a budget. You spend what you have, you save for things that you need to invest in. And as she got towards the end of the year, she's like, oh, I've got, another $80,000. I've got to spend it or I'll lose it. And I remember the place that I was in had probably 2-year-old PCs. And next week I came in, rows of computers, just brand new. And they don't necessarily need to spend the money, but they feel like they have to. Otherwise, their budget will get cut because they didn't spend it. But this
has led to a criticism of the DougCo school board now,
yes,
that they've been sitting on too much money, which is wild, because in 2008, they said we need money. The taxpayers turned them down. So there were budget cuts, reorganizations, reforms like you talk about, but now people are screaming, look at these cheap bastards. They're hoarding this money, and it should be put back into the schools.
Yeah. And that rumor has been perpetuated by the union. If you look at they have a lot of flyers going out. In fact, for I think the last 10, 12 months, they've been flyering, and a lot of the accusations in there are, and for someone who's ever done a budget, seem kind of ludicrous. Like, oh, the district is hoarding money, or they're keeping it from the classroom. And what they'll do is they took a snapshot of the budget, inflated the number, and then said, oh, look at all this money they have. But quite frankly, it's not a real number. And the money that they do have, some of it's for the Tabor Reserve, some of it's a savings program that they've put together, that they've had their auditors say, hey, this is sound, this is good financial sound budgeting that you're doing. But they're selling it a little bit differently, like, oh, saving is an irresponsible thing. Saving is not good for the child. You've got to spend it all. And my argument to that would be is how is it good for the child if you spend everything you've got and you have a rescission or a recession and you end up not having any money that year?
Like they had in 2008, and therefore they couldn't ride through the tough time because they hadn't saved up something before. All right, let's talk about the kids, and that's what we care about, is making sure that the kids are getting a real education. In order to do that, you got to get the best, you got to get the brightest in teachers. Fortunately, in Colorado, absolutely, we've got some great school districts, and we've got great teachers. We haven't been able to reward those great teachers because every school district has this salary schedule. Mm-hmm. Teachers get paid by how long they've been in the system and how many college degrees they have. And the longer you are in, and the more pieces of paper you earn at college, the more you get paid.
Correct.
That's the incentive. It has nothing to do with how well you teach kids. Now that there's no union contract in DougCo, what's the reaction from the teachers first, and then how's that affecting the kids? We've gone for nearly a year now, I think, without a contract. Mm-hmm. It seems like kids are still getting taught.
Yeah, kids are still being taught in school. And I would say that the teachers' evaluations have done a couple of things. One, teachers are kind of learning day to day about what they're going to be evaluated on. And while the system may not be perfect right now, it is absolutely leaps and bounds beyond anything else that exists. Instead of a schedule, or I should say dictated a salary amount for any teacher regarding experience. They have salary bands for different teachers. So
salary bands.
Sorry, I think salary schedules based on markets in DougCo. So if they need more special ed teachers and less art teachers, the special ed position will pay more than an art teacher will. And there's been an adjustment there, but more importantly, they were able to do highly effective teachers were able to get a 9.2% raise this year.
Really?
Yeah, and everyone has a story, whether they had a bad teacher or a good teacher, and quite frankly, I love teachers. I love good teachers, and I want good teachers to get the raises.
Have teachers been flying out of that district? I know that when the union was in negotiations, you have to keep this government contract. We have to have this teacher's contract. Otherwise, there's going to be teacher flight and they're going to leave.
There's been a lot of, accusations, from the union side saying, oh, teachers are leaving in mass exodus. And quite frankly, there's more people wanting to flow into the district than there are wanting to flow out. And if you look at the year-to-year numbers, I think it's only up 1%. I think it was 12% last year, and it's like 13% this year. It's a minor change, and quite frankly, one of the terms that expired in the union contract was I've heard it described as a wet kiss. It was a $40,000 bonus to retire this year. It was part of the existing union contract. It expired this year. So teachers that could retire.
You got a $40,000 bonus to quit your job?
Approximately $40,000
Nice.
to retire. And what's interesting is they'll say, oh, teachers leaving the district, but they never actually mention, oh, by the way, this was the last year that they could have that benefit. So sure, some teachers retired, for $40,000. Yeah, I could totally understand that.
I could understand a little early retirement myself. Yeah. All right, how do the voters of this district feel? And the reason why is that a majority of this board will be up for election in the fall, and a lot of people are seeing this as a referendum on these reforms. I've heard that people like them, but you're more out in the field. Tell me what's the vibe?
Yeah, out in the field, there has been some work done to make the board look bad, as I told you, with the $83 million fund balance and different flyers they put out. But a lot of people in DougCo, the majority, and I've seen numbers that in the high 60s, low 70s, love reform. They love pay for performance. They love the choice scholarship program. They're used to being able to go to Starbucks and order a latte, so it makes perfect sense to them to be able to order the right school for their child in order to make sure they get the education.
The difference being, though, there's a natural instinct to dislike your school board. You always dislike it. What do you think about your city council? Oh, that bunch of bums. Are these races shaping up to be ugly?
Oh, I think so, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of people, too, that have to be careful about the numbers that they use. There were groups out there that were a group called Strong Schools Coalition, which I cleverly renamed Skewed Stats Coalition, which all they would ever do is skew a stat and try to make the board look bad. However, I've seen candidates using those numbers as a reason to run. It's like, be careful, those numbers are not accurate. So.
Numbers, schmumbers. Damon Sasso, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
No problem.
You, stay tuned.